Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We are so glad to have you here for our webinar on digital impact assessment. My name is Bridget John. I'm from the International Association for Impact Assessment, or IAIA, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lauralee Fortuny, who's working technical magic in the background to make sure everything runs smoothly for you today. If you hear anything that you want to retweet or share out or shout out, please feel free to do that. You can see our Twitter handle as well as a hashtag there for you to share. So before we jump into the meat of our session today, I just want to get a few quick housekeeping things out of the way for you. For those of you who aren't familiar with IAIA, I just want to let you know about some resources that we have available for you. We do have all of our webinars on demand, and they are available on our website. Lauralee is going to drop that link for you into the chat. We have one on ESG, one on COVID impacts on field assessment work. We have ones on social and biodiversity and health impact assessment, just a wide variety. So feel free to check that out. In addition, today is the second in our series on digital impact assessment. You can also find at that link the first in our series, which was highlighting some digital impact tools in Vigo and iReport. And so you'll want to check those out. IAIA has a couple upcoming events. We have a symposium happening in Cape Town, South Africa on impact assessment and climate change. Registration is open and more information is being made available on our website as we go. We also have some online training courses that you may want to check out. They are kind of short, few hours a day, couple days a week for a couple weeks. So some great topics, variety of topics there to get some good training. And if you haven't been to our website, iai.org, I encourage you, in addition to the things I've already mentioned, we have a lot of downloadable publications for you. They range in content from really short 2-page fast tips series to some more meaty things, more lengthy things, our best practice principles, some guidelines, some handbooks. So a lot of free resources for you there. So please visit our website and check it out. So in addition, a few more housekeeping things, and then we can get right into it. The control panel, for those of you who may not be familiar with the GoToWebinar format, there is on the top of your control panel a little box, either orange or red with a white arrow in it. And you can click on that at any time to minimize or maximize your control panel screen. And you can also click and drag your control panel and move it out of the way. We don't want it to get in the way of your slides or seeing the presenters at all. Yes, indeed, we are recording today's session, and that will be made available to you. You'll receive a link to that in a day or two. And we will be taking questions, plenty of time for questions towards the end of our webinar, 20 to 30 minutes. But don't feel like you have to hang on to your questions until the end. Please feel free to type them into the chat or the questions pane. It's a gray bar in your control panel. Type those in at any time as you're thinking of them. We will be watching for them on the back end to make sure we'll get as many of them as we can to our presenter today for him to answer. And the slides will be made available to you. There are a couple handouts in the handouts panel right now in your control panel. It's leading the digital journey document and then presenter bios. The slides for today's webinar will be sent to you in a link, that's the same link that you get for the recording. So you will get access to them. You can't download them yet today, but you will get them shortly. So with all of that out of the way, I'm really pleased to introduce to you our speakers today. Josh Fothergill is moderating our session today, and he's going to kick us off. He is the founder and director of Fothergill Training and Consulting. He's a longtime II member, and his organization provides independent impact assessment expertise and capacity building services. He's also the lead author of The State of Digital IA Practice, which was launched in late 2021, and it was partially funded by a grant from IAIA. He also created the award-winning EIA Quality Mark Scheme. So Josh is going to set the stage for us about digital impact assessment, and then he's going to turn it over to our key presenter and panelist today, Chris Gentle. And Chris is the program director at WABSI, the Western Australia Biodiversity Science Institute. He has over 20 years of experience consulting at a strategic level within the information management industry for natural resources and government sectors. And Chris has been leading the WABSI efforts to digitally transform environmental assessment since 2017. So lots of great expertise for you here today. So we hope you're going to really enjoy this webinar on exploring Western Australia's transformation to digital environmental assessments. So with that, I am going to turn it all over to Josh, who's going to kick it off and get us started. Over to you, Josh.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Thank you for that introduction. And yeah, we've got a fantastic deep dive into what's going on in Western Australia today. So we're going to be exploring that transformation to digital environmental assessments and looking at a number of the projects going on there, in particular the shared analytical framework for the environment. Really pleased to get this second webinar in the series going, and we're certainly hoping to run a couple more before the end of the year, hopefully one on artificial intelligence, and then a later one looking at hopefully a deep dive into a European project in a European country that's doing quite a lot around digital impact assessments. Also really good today. I think we've got a good span of the world. We're from the east coast of the Americas, where it's quite early morning, but hopefully a few people joining us through kind of lunchtime in Africa and Europe, and then across Asia and to Australia and Japan, where it's kind of evening time. So hopefully got a good engagement across the world in terms of delegates. So this series comes out of the State of Digital Impact Assessment Practice report, and this was a research area that, as Bridget mentioned, was part funded by an IAIA innovation grant, and those are small support grants to help kind of different ideas from IAIA members that will help move practice forward and also help fit with the aims of what the International Association for Impact Assessment is all about and its strategic aims. So understanding what's going on with digital impact assessment, what technologies and approaches are coming forward, how they're being used in different parts of the world, was an area that the IAIA was willing to support, and it was an area that I was particularly interested in hearing about. And there's been a number of the IAIA annual conferences that have had quite a focus on this, in particularly starting with the Florence conference back in 2015. So in terms of that report, as Bridget mentioned, launched in December 2021, you can gain access to it either from the IAIA publications pages or from fothergilltc.com/digital. You can also gain access to the launch webinar that takes you through the report, its key components, and equally the March webinar we had on digital impact assessment workspaces, which looked at two particular case studies of the Envigo workspace and the iReport as to different ways that the actual activity of impact assessment, the way we plan our assessments, the way we undertake our assessments, the way we present and report them and engage stakeholders, how some of that is now moving with these digital tools into a much more kind of online space with more open source data and sharing and access at different points. And the report covers many different aspects of that. I guess a key question is, what do we actually mean by digital impact assessment? And, what does that actually mean? Does that just mean presenting an environmental report or an environmental impact statement as a PDF? Is that digital impact assessment? Is it the use of something like you can see on the screen there with the image of kind of augmented reality type systems? Is it the use of mobile phone technology and social media? And in fact, I think the view was we took quite a broad view in the research and came up with a definition which was this that you can see on the screen: the use of advances in digital technology and their applications in the pursuit of enabling more effective impact assessment practice. So that's the definition that I guess the IAIA has effectively adopted now as part of the joint report that came out last year. So there wasn't an adopted definition before that, and lots of different views as to what digital impact assessment was. I know my area is digital impact assessment, I'm not sure about that. I think we tried to take a much broader view to recognise there is this real digital transition going on across the world, and it's been going on for quite some time, really since the internet and mobile phones really became more pervasive and kind of all-encompassing across society from the kind of late 90s. But we're really seeing that embed into activities now, and we're seeing technologies brought into impact assessment as well as bespoke tools being built into different aspects of the impact assessment process, or to kind of hold the entirety of an impact assessment within them as those digital workspaces that I was just talking about. I think we've got a presenter today from Western Australia, but I think we can really say this is a global phenomenon. Just like digital transformation in society and smart cities and these type of activities is a global phenomenon, we're also seeing this in terms of impact assessment processes taking up various different technologies and digital approaches across the world. So we're hoping later in the year to be able to have the IFC do a presentation with us about that artificial intelligence and how that is being used in the ESIA process, and potentially some of that additional data approaches around the social license in relation to their projects. The report to the State of EIA of digital impact assessment practice also talks about various data and environmental data systems being used in the Canadian system. Certainly since that launch event, we've heard about digital transformation being considered in relation to NEPA in the USA, and practice and approaches going on in Mexico. And you can see from this map and the information that you can see around it, there are digital approaches going on in practice all over the world, from the use of drones and kind of digital air quality surveys and these kind of things over in Nepal, in Africa, to kind of more digitized environmental statements in Europe, and seeing those in particularly the kind of eastern side of Australia. And this really amazing and interesting big project that we're going to hear about later today in Western Australia, that really is kind of pushing the bubble, I think, in terms of what is achievable when we come together and look to use some of these digital tools. So what the report does is try to identify within that broad definition of digital impact assessment, try to identify some areas of some elements of practice where we can focus in and perhaps begin to kind of gather and have conversations. So it divides it into two areas: digital approaches and technologies that are being brought into impact assessment in order to enable progress, and digital transformation within actual aspects of the impact assessment process. So these are kind of, I guess, tend to be projects that are originating from within impact assessment or within consultancies or particular practices around the world and regulatory systems, whereas these areas tend to be advances that have been made elsewhere, and then they're looking to be seen, can we use this in some way within the impact assessment process? And you can see the areas here, from online environmental and social management systems through kind of digital baseline data capture, so drones, satellite imagery, automatic cameras, and audio capture devices for biodiversity, etc. Artificial intelligence within the impact assessment process, natural language processing to read environmental statements and bring out kind of contextual statements as to whether things are negative or positive in terms of different topics that are being made, being highlighted in relation to different types of projects. The use of virtual, augmented and mixed realities within the impact assessment process, consultation in virtual realms, augmented reality where you can hold a digital screen up and see on the view that you can see imposed upon it different pieces of digital data, digital twins as well of sites, so that we can go in and look at effects and add things into the process. And you can see all the various other areas as well. Now, the main area we're going to focus on today, or where it was classified, at least in the report of the Western Australian kind of SAFE project, is in this kind of inter-impact assessment and kind of major environmental management systems. I think in many ways, actually, it spans quite a number of these different topic areas, and you will see this within digital impact assessment. They don't necessarily nicely fit within a individual box. Even with a data capture device, you might be using some artificial intelligence to begin to try and identify what the sound is and what species is being picked up in relation to those that audio that might be being picked up in the kind of habitat when we've left that capture device around. So we do see interaction between. I certainly think the Western Australian case is one of those. But to just highlight within the report, if you're interested in that particular area, what it talks about in relation to this sub-theme digital inter-impact assessment and online management systems for both environmental and social data is that these are often, they can be as simple as online portals that have environmental and social data that can be viewed and downloaded, or even gathered by algorithms and brought into separate systems. Or they can be something that is much more interactive and built and kind of considered and thought about to generate things forward. And the challenge is always about kind of how do we get the value out of our impact assessments and move them forward into something more useful. So, not just from monitoring data, but also from the predictions for our environmental statements. How do we get this information back into the system so it can help us in the future, as well as other environmental data sources that exist and can be used within the impact assessment process? So we have various portals. The UK's magic.gov.uk is an environmental data portal that's been running for just over 20 years. Denmark has a more recent portal that you can see the link to there, and the /English version will give you an English language access to that, and that gives you various data layers and GIS in terms of environmental risks. We see various impact assessment tools that try and bring this information together. An early one discussed back in 2015 was Cucumber, that was trying to map various different impact assessments that had gone on around the world to make people more aware of how much impact assessment was going on, what had happened in their area. Perhaps wasn't as taken up as practitioners had hoped. South Africa has a national screening tool that allows you to overlay environmental data with your project to understand risk. And then what you can see here is an example of a significance weighting tool, this environmental sensitivity mapper. And this is taking it one step further. You can add weightings, your own preferences and weightings in relation to environmental risks, so that you can begin to see the issues as you perceive them as kind of priority and relevance in relation to perhaps an SEA process or a plan within the Irish context. And then finally, we get much broader multi-sector systems, and what I'm going to move on to now and hand over to present is just one of those, and that is the shared analytical framework for the environment in Western Australia. So I'm now going to hand over to Chris Gentle, who, as Bridget mentioned, is the Programme Director at the Western Australian Biodiversity Science Institute. And just to say, we're very fortunate to have Chris with us today because he did test positive for COVID this morning and is struggling through. So we are very thankful to have Chris with us. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Josh. And good evening or good morning to everyone, depending on where you are. Can I start, please, with a thank you to the IAIA for the opportunity to talk this afternoon. This evening, it's 7:15 where I am in Perth. My topic today, if I can, there we go, is to talk to you a little bit about the West Australian journey towards digitally transforming environmental impact assessment. I thought I'd start briefly, if I could, with a little bit about who is WABSI. WABSI is the West Australian Biodiversity Science Institute. They have a peer organisation, the West Australian Marine Science Institute. Just realised I hadn't had the camera on, apologies, to the two science institutes. Now, their roles, they're a collaboration of leading research institutions, and they really sit at the intersection between industry, research institutions and government organisations And they're there really to take on awkward challenges, things that are multi-institutional, long-term in time frame, and somewhat challenging in terms of how they work. So they're an independent entity. They're made up of the partners that you can see on the screen there, and they're really geared to taking on medium to long-term challenges that are awkward in terms of what they need to address. Before I go any further, if I could, I would very much like to just very quick acknowledgement of country. So wish to acknowledge the Noongar Whadjuk people. They're the traditional custodians of the land upon which I'm sitting at the moment, and wish to acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer our respects to elders past and present. At the same time as I'm doing some acknowledgements, I would very much also like to publicly state that although I'm talking to you today on behalf of the team in WA, it is very much a team effort in Western Australia. There's been well over 100 to, I think, around 130 people involved in this particular series of projects since 2017. So although it's a WABSI presenting the project today, it's very important that we acknowledge our partners in West Australian Government, West Australian industry, NGOs, and our partners in the environmental and research institutions as well, which is really key. So what we present today is not all WABSI work, but it is WABSI that has had a pretty significant role in pulling this together. So with all that out of the way, on to digitally transforming EIA in WA. Our focus since 2017 has really been to progress our understanding of the cumulative impact of an action on a region over time. So that's been one of our key challenges. The second element to it has been while streamlining environmental assessment and approvals. How have we gone about it? We've gone through quite a rigorous process to work through and just unpack that. And we've landed on high volumes of quality data. It needs to be shared. We need a place to put that data. Someone needs to care for it, love it, look after it. We need the workflow tools to enable the process efficiencies and the analytic tools for decision support and forecasting. So a lot of the process tools are about efficient, and a lot of the data and the data science is really about decision support in terms of making things effective. Key drivers for that. So in Western Australia, we're really looking for how we can have that information and analytic tools to be leveraged by both state and Commonwealth regulators, proponents in the community for really 4 key things. First one is improving the efficiency of environmental assessments from project inception all the way through to final decision for proponents and regulator. Secondly is around improving confidence for the regulator, and there's 2, which I'll discuss, the state and the Commonwealth, in that they've made the correct decision at a project level and at a landscape cumulative impact scale. And that really is giving the regulator confidence that they're setting the right conditions and falling back on an appropriate degree of the precautionary principle and the conditions that they set for projects. Next is to improve public trust in EIA decisions, and that's really about transparency and visibility of the data and the methods underpinning those decisions, and providing assurance that things are going as we said they ought when the projects were put forward and approved. So since 2017, and again, we acknowledge this has been going for longer than that, but we've got 3 key disruptions that we've been working to and working towards. The first one is really around data, the data disruption, which we'll come to and talk to. The second is digital. How do we get away from either emailing things or PDFs? And while I appreciate PDFs are digital, that's not sort of digital we're after in this instance, and moving on to decision support. And one of the key reasons being for that, we've had some changes in our environmental legislation over here 18 months ago that have now formally introduced the concept of cumulative impact into some of that legislation. And of course, that creates an enormous challenge when you're going from project by project bespoke based assessment to assessments that now need to consider the cumulative, ideally through a data commons. 3 key objectives that we're working to, getting away from bespoke and moving towards robust, repeatable and sustainable decision support, analytics and forecasting, and the 3 drivers that we mentioned earlier. And we've taken 4 steps to our process. The first one is around how do we move from individual environmental assessments, which is where we were a number of years ago, moving towards shared information repositories, which we'll talk to you a little bit about our journey since 2017 in that. progressing towards digital tools, analytics, decision support, ultimately aiming for forecasting if we get really ambitious scenario planning, and moving towards regional assessment and regional analytics. One of the things where we've had some success in Western Australia has to keep coming back to a customer-centric view, which is why. Why is this important? I won't read what's on the screen. I appreciate that's very wordy. But really, from our perspective, it's been transitioning from a conversation that we started, or I was personally involved in, from 2017. That was an efficiency conversation. How do we do it faster? How do we do EIA faster? The next step of the conversation is very much around how do we do it not only faster but more effectively to start to allow for better environmental outcome in an evidence-based way that is transparent. And lastly, starting to move towards the cumulative, such that we can understand on a regional scale how impacts need to be assessed and appropriate conditions set. As part of that journey, since 2017, we interviewed around 50 stakeholders, and the key drivers at that time that they were looking for in terms of benefits and outcomes were very much around the digital EIA process. We did it again in 2019, and the conversation had moved on to, and this is additive, so digital EIA didn't drop off, but we added significant conversation around ESG. Environmental, social and governance reporting, specifically around, in our case, biodiversity. I'm happy to talk about that if we get time and questions. And then lastly, it was very much around how do you get to transparent independent reporting benefits in terms of environmental economic accounts, TNFD, Act changes, etc., to work your way through. There's an element also around transparent independent reporting, which in our space is very much about reporting on country. So it's giving both community members and also traditional owners the opportunity to have an independent view on what they define as their land or their country, which may well be different from a traditional Western approach, which could be bound around a Western legal boundary, such as a mining lease, or perhaps an environmental boundary which may not correspond with definition of country. So the next few slides are a little bit about EIA in Western Australia, and the caveat up front says that I am not an EIA practitioner or expert, and there's the two links to the two key organisations, the Environmental Consultants Association and the Environmental Institute of Australia and New Zealand. They're the folk that are really well qualified to talk about this. So the next few slides are an amateur's view, and if you could take it in positive spirit, but if I get it wrong, there's good reason for it. So EIA in Western Australia, and the next, I think, 4 slides are there just to explain a little context before we move into the digital side of things and the digital systems. There are 2 main parts to EIA in Western Australia. One is the state legislation, which is managed, if you will, by the Environmental Protection Authority, which was established in 1971. There's 2 links in there to the EPA and to their strategic plan. The strategic plan, the strategies box that you see on screen, is from their strategic plan from 2019 to 2022. Where they had 4 key strategies that they were driving forward against. And of particular relevance to our conversation today was the first 2. Strategy 1, which was about improving the assessment and management of cumulative impacts, and strategy 2, being innovative in environmental information and digital EIA. And from our perspective, they're linked, they're very, very tightly linked. And of course, there's other elements to that, including science, environmental management, etc. But they're 2 key factors for that. Those documents, the strategy document is worth a read if you have an interest. It's quite short, it's only about 4 pages, but it gives a good set of drivers and outcomes and measures for our EPA in Western Australia. The process in Western Australia has 3 main elements to it. There is a set of procedures that define in law how EIA is undertaken, and that's the box on at the very least on my left with the Environmental Protection Act at the top of the diagram. Working through that, you have the policies and the associated regulations, the documents to support and the considerations, and then the advice and the reference material on the way through. So that's both administrative, environmental, and scientific in terms of how some of the surveys, etc., are undertaken. On the right there are 5 main stages to EIA, and that's the assessment process itself. I won't dwell on this. The links are there. The process is thorough, and I guess depending on your perspective, can be challenging in that it can take somewhere between 18 months to 3 years to work you through this process if it has to go through public environmental reviews or is contentious. So part of our challenge here is how do we accelerate that, particularly with the disruption of cumulative, while not skewing the system in terms of either environmental or economic outcome. Right at the front, I mentioned that we had 3 disruptions. We had data, which I'll come to in a second. The second we had was digital, and then the third was decision support. We're a little bit out of order, but this is one of the key elements that we have for digital. So our colleagues at the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation in WA, or WA, have been building a system for around about 2 years now called Environment Online, and it's designed to be the secure digital platform, a single gateway for regular activities, case management, and integrated data management. So prior to Environment Online, this is very topical. This is due to go live in about 4 weeks, so I know there's some excited and nervous people in those teams that are working on this. Prior to that, we used to manage things in PDS and email. By and large, not exclusively, but by and large. So it technically was digital, but it wasn't particularly clever. And the Environment Online system is designed to just improve that oversight. So digitising the assessment process itself, application status notifications, etc., working its way through. So that system I can't show you today. It's due to go live in about 4 weeks. So there may be the opportunity to come back. As I said, that was developed by our team at WA, and they're doing an awesome job of pulling that particular system together. The second part of EIA in Western Australia is our interaction with the Commonwealth in Australia, the Commonwealth Government. So we have 2 acts. The first is our Environmental Protection Act in WA. The second is the Commonwealth Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. And that comes into play if your proposal triggers or falls over the elements of national environmental significance which are listed on the screen. And that happens a lot, particularly in Western Australia in relation to threatened species which are national. Now, it's important just to clarify, as soon as you trigger that act, you need to deal with 2 regulators with 2 sets of legislation, etc. So things get more complex and more complicated, and are a great example of how digital EIA should be able to assist both regulators by having common or shared data points, or common or shared analytics, decision support, or reporting tools. So on to a little bit about our journey, which is the West Australian side. So how can really shared data science and digital transformation excuse me, assist in moving through those challenges? And our response to it has been to pull together a framework. We've used the acronym SEAF, Shared Analytic Framework for the Environment. And it's really meant to be a guide of sort of management tools or concepts to describe capabilities which we can build against and execute against to make the process more efficient and robust and repeatable as we work our way through. So the benefit or the value of having a shared framework, really it's around flexibility. It's giving people the opportunity to take their own capabilities and allow them to be leveraged. The analytic tools should be repurposable, and we should be able to work our way through in terms of progressive improvement. At the bottom there, that diagram under the arch is an attempt at a cartoon for a national environmental standard, how you might achieve such a thing. And it's really working its way through data collection, the protocols for data curation, how we can integrate that data through systems and consistent terminology, most importantly then how we start to put it to work in terms of scenarios and modelling, and then tools and the reporting at the end of it. The next slide is quite complex. And if I could also just acknowledge GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. On the top right-hand side of screen was a paper that they wrote some time ago now. I think it was around 2014, 15, somewhere there, which was delivering biodiversity knowledge in the information age. We've, with permission, repurposed some of the key elements of that document and turned that into the shared analytic framework that you see in front of you. The logic behind this, it's not rocket science. The logic was that most of the things, if we're trying to work our way through, a culture of how do you get people to want to share data, and what do you need in place to make that happen? How do you collect observations and measurements, data descriptions, metadata, etc.? Who's going to do the curation, the loving and caring of the data? And then how do you get it integrated and start to put it to work? In WA, we'll show a pretty good case in a second for cultural change, the collection points curation. We've got a fair bit of work to do still around integrate and analyse. We'll talk about what we're doing there. And then we're really into the benefits case. One of the things that's interesting out of this, and we've done a fair bit of economic analysis around this, is that you only really claim the benefit when you get to the top, when you can put this to work. So if you're a user of these systems, then you can claim an economic benefit, but strictly speaking, in economic terms, anything below that is a cost. So most people are trying to optimize it. And that's not necessarily what we're after. It really is a case of how can you streamline your way from the bottom to the top of that particular framework, but again, in such a way that it's not bespoke and that it is robust, repeatable and sustainable. So I'm going to talk for a little moment now about the culture, the collect, curate, and then we'll come back to integrate, analyse and use. So what have we achieved? I'll show you the system in a second. I'll be bold and I'll try a quick drop out of PowerPoint to a live system just to show you. In 2018, there was a cultural shift in Western Australia where proponents were done, sort of compelled, sort of done willingly, but certainly supported by industry and government at the same time, to start submitting survey data that they collect as part of an impact assessment. So if as part of your impact assessment you were required to show as part of your evidence base a survey for flora or fauna, historically that would have been put into a 500-page PDF, and that's what would have been sent across to the regulator. So their old version of data science would have been Control F in Adobe. That's changing, and it's changing quickly. In 2018, there was a change in policy where the IPSA, number one on that list, there's about 500 flora and fauna surveys that are done annually in WA for the purpose of the EIA. It's about $40 million Australian worth of effort. If you now undertake a survey as part of EIA, you're compelled to submit that to the regulator. And that's the data, the metadata, the survey boundaries, and it's all done to a standard. In the 4 years or so that's been running, we're right on track for the 500 surveys a year. So it's around $160 million worth of data that's been working its way through the process. Number three in there is the index of marine surveys, which is the same concept, just simply in the marine domain. And again, that's around $50 million annually of survey effort that's now being collected. If you combine those, just really simple math, it's around about $100 million a year. What it says is that over the next decade, we're going to get $1 billion data asset that we should be able to put to work. And it's a very big data asset that we've never had before. More to the point, it's growing, it's robust because it's collected to a set of standards. It's repeatable because those standards are written into guidance and guidelines. And it's sustainable because it's now policy. So we're collecting the data, which is the foundation of that SEAF framework, after the culture shift to work that way through. Number two, the digitally transforming environmental assessment case, which was done in 2019, made a benefits case that predicted in the order of 150 million Australian dollars of net present value benefit to the state of WA if we could take a certain amount of time out of a certain amount of case studies. That was accepted by West Australian Government Treasury and the Commonwealth Government Treasury, and part of that document, which is publicly available, and in some of the links which are either in these slides or in the handout. Part of the case that then got the Environment Online program funded, which is number 5 in this case, which was a combined program with West Australian Government and the Commonwealth Government, approximately $25 million each. That was funded in 2020 and is due to start turning on August 16 in the West Australian case. Importantly, also in our case, if you come back to the SEAF framework, which goes culture, collect, and then curate, if the IBSA program is collecting all these surveys, again, if we can't get them curated and turned into useful data, you can argue that we've made the process less efficient rather than more. So in 2020, the West Australian Government, with support from our Commonwealth Government, took the policy decision to form a Biodiversity Information Office, or a BIO, and their job is to be the love of the carer and the curator of the flora and fauna data for the state of WA. And they have just released the first beta of their release of their system, and we'll have a quick look at that in a second. So that's what's been achieved. Everything green there is done, or is very close to being done. What's interesting out of that, though, if you accept the Environment Online side, we still haven't put it to work. We still haven't got as far as integrate, analyse, and use. And that's where the next part of our conversation goes around the shared environmental analytics facility, which we're doing a feasibility study for at the moment. So examples, 3 examples there. Excuse me, 3 examples for culture, collect, and curate. First is an example around culture, just to demonstrate that this is not a West Australian thing. It's very much amongst our peer jurisdictions, the other states and territories in WA. 2019, there was further evidence in 2018 where COAG, which is the Commonwealth of Australian Governments, working their way through to explore joint ways to capture, curate, store and share biodiversity data and other relevant data. And that's kicked on into the systems which I've just spoken about briefly. The collected space, the tangible example, is the Index of Biodiversity Survey for Assessment, which I'm going to boldly drop out of this in a second and try and show you. And the curate example of the same thing is our bio team, who take the data that is collected as individual surveys in IBSA and curate that, quality control it, and turn it into operating layers. So if you bear with me for 1 second, I'll be bold and drop out of the PowerPoint and show you a screen. I'll be very brief. These are the URLs are on the PowerPoint that will come out. This is a program from our Department of Water and Environmental Regulation called IBSA, as it says on screen. And look, its job very simply is to be the place when you want to lodge your project to be assessed. So you lodge the written reports, the written submissions, all the things involved in the impact assessment itself. But if in that, drawing the conclusions to your recommendations for what you think the conditions should be or how the project should go ahead, you have undertaken surveys. They're the surveys that now need to be linked into that process with a separate set of submissions. And that's being done such that the regulator can have the evidence base from the direct data, not just the interpreted products, such that they can start to form their own opinion, not just have a PDF interpretation of the proponent's or the proponent's consultant's opinion of how that works. And I won't go into all the detail around this, but there is a lot of work gone into this in terms of standards and metadata and all those kind of good things. But I thought I'd just show you very briefly. It doesn't look particularly funky. You can see in there there's 1,526 surveys that have been lodged. And in the essence of time, I've cheated, and the first one, fortunately, is going to work well for us. We'll click on the first one. And you can see in there, it will have in the about, it will tell you what the survey was, who it was collected for. It'll tell you a little bit about the survey area. It'll bring up a map of where it is, and you can zoom in and out and see where that is, etc. And it has a citation if this needs referencing. Importantly, from our perspective, it has the survey data. The survey report is text. The data you can download. The survey report is in text form as it's machine readable for AIML type stuff. The survey reports, again, you can download the metadata. If I come across, you'll see here the side of who's done the work and the metadata standard that's there. Again, it's pretty standard things, but it's there and it's good. The thing that gets us most excited is the actual survey reports themselves are also submitted. So this is 108 pages, and it is the full reports around the flora and vegetation assessment. In this case, it was in spring 2020, prepared by a consultant for a company, and they've agreed that this can be put out and published. So this is part of our data element of SEAF, where we've got the culture change to get industry and others to want to support. And then we've got the system in place now to enable that data to be collected. So this data itself, again, I'm just looking for a map, there you go. So this is where the surveys were done. That data itself, though, is not curated, it's not cared, it's not brought together in a particularly useful form. So yes, you can download it, but if you wanted to integrate it with other data sets, flora or fauna, you would need to do that. The next step in our chain is the Biodiversity Information Office. This system was launched about 2 weeks ago, so it's very new. And I'm an amateur driver of it, but this is the system where you, if I get this right, in effect, you can go from the survey data, the survey reports, and the data itself being lodged, to then actually getting the data itself. There are 7,320 approximate data sets in that area. And this is the data that is there. Now, this data has been curated. So it has been baselined and curated and quality controlled and quality checked, and is available for you to pick up and use and download. So what that is just a very quick example of is some of the actual systems that we're endeavouring to use, working our way through in the SEAF process. Why is this important? So if we're going to go cultural and we're going to think about cumulative, very quickly, the next 3 slides are just giving you an understanding of some of the challenges that our regulators have. And this is in the Pilbara, which is approximately the same land area as Spain. It's a really big area. These are some BHP slides. They've given us permission to use them. And this is an area where a strategic assessment was undertaken. This was the number of mining, mining assets that were operating, give or take, 7 years ago in the Pilbara, and this is what's planned. So you can see if we're going from, what is, what was to what is planned. It's a big change, and if you're the regulator there, how do you start to make, how do you give yourself the best chance of sensible decision making? Really around a cumulative, such that you can set the right conditions that help both the economy but also the environment be sustainable over time. So that kind of covers up quickly, and I'm conscious of time, the culture, the collect and the curate side. What about the integrate, analyse, and very importantly, put it all to work use? So SEAF is just designed to be a plan. It's designed to be a framework and management tool such that you can get a consistent view of the capabilities required to collect and curate and enable that data to start to be integrated and made analytics ready, and to help align the effort and prioritise investment across those capabilities. We were very fortunate in 2021 to partner with PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Microsoft. As part of their own sustainability work, they have linked into this project, so it's pro bono on their behalf, and they've spent a significant amount of energy and resource to help us. And what we've been really trying to work through is, how do we go, if we're going to go from bespoke to robust, repeatable and sustainable in terms of the data and the analytics, how do we operationalise that? What is actually required to operationalise shared environmental analytics? So it's key governance, key legal, key operational and key technology challenges such that we can scale efficiently across regions. So there's only about 5 slides to go. They are very wordy, which I've left them in deliberately if you choose to download and have a read of all these slides. There's a lot of effort gone into creating them. You're very welcome. If not, I won't read them. I'll just talk to some of the highlights. So last year we engaged, again, it was around 50 key stakeholders across 7 key stakeholder groups. They were consulted regarding the need for innovation in how we operationalise shared environmental analytics. And they were state and Commonwealth government, key individuals and organisations. So by that, that's Chief Scientist of Australia, those sort of folks. Industry, science and research, traditional owners, environmental interest groups or NGOs, and the Consultants Association. We asked them, as we said, was what they see as the key opportunity for innovation in how we move it forward. And really, it was all about integrating existing valuable disparate upstream data initiatives. How do you get those integrated such that we're moving from process-based assessment to standards-based assessments? How do you drive equitable, transparent data access and ensure that that is into the analytics, the decision support and the reporting, not just access to the data? So it brings into question, how do you enable the interpretation and make sure that all folks have access to the appropriate way of communicating and presenting that information? So for example, there's specifically community members who have a vested interest or a very keen understanding or want to understand what's occurring on country, but may not be environmentally trained. How do you level the playing field on that? And how do you get flexibility at a regional level, but enable the key elements around particularly governance and technology to be harmonised such that you're getting an efficiency by not reinventing those, but acknowledging that regions are clearly different and they have different environmental challenges, different social challenges, and different economic drivers as well. So out of that, what we consistently heard there was how do you make that information available? So we've got through the culture, collect and curate. Now how do we get it out for use? And if we did that, really what does the opportunity start to look like? And on the left there are some of the key drivers where the perception from our stakeholders for environmental management is falling short, or where we can do better, if you will. And on the right-hand side there is the inverse, which is the opportunities, which is increasing the value for all. If we have a shared or commons around environmental data and environmental analytics through a sustainable value chain, data just flows and the process works such that we can digitise EIA, work on ESG, and start to move into the reporting on country state of environment type pathways as well. And again, the TNFD and the economics I'll leave off to the side, although it's a fundamental driver for what I think will come out of this. The challenge of putting it all to its use. So key challenges, again, the 4 things that were there. Pardon me. The challenges that need to be resolved, which is some of the common themes on the left. Concerns to be considered in designs and implementation, some of the expected benefits and considerations for the roadmap development. I won't read them out. I'll skip over this slide. Again, please pick it up if it's of interest. There was a lot of thought gone into some of the key challenges, and I suspect that they're universal. I don't think they're unique to Western Australia or Australia at all. I think they're, my hypothesis is that they're a very shared or common set of challenges. The concerns, I believe, also will be very common around cost, around IP, management perception, data reliance, and some of the legals, indemnities and warranties, etc. Key benefits, again, better EIA, faster EIA, harmonised around ESG, and moving into both forecasting and scenario planning, which will be around the cumulative, and some of the key themes that we need to move to, which was very much around clarity for the benefits and pathways, but that's more execution type challenge. The vision that we've developed for that was really to propose the concept of a shared environmental analytics facility, and the construct for that was that if something was if we're moving to start to understand the cumulative, we're really asking the question to which we may or may not have full confidence that we know the answer to, which makes everybody nervous. It makes CEOs nervous, it makes environmental folk nervous, it makes traditional owners and community members nervous. So if you're really for the first time really trying to unpack the cumulative side of things, there's challenges in that and there's risk in that. So the SAFE framework was designed to help us start to get that sustainable data flows and start to move into the shared analytics space. The shared governance elements around this is designed to help with controls such that people will be prepared to invest and put their trusted data into such a facility. And then the technology aspect was really there such that we can optimise the cost and do equal and opposite things. First one is make it very secure, and the second one is try and make it very open to allow for innovation, and that's where Microsoft has been helping us with that particular challenge. What are we doing now? We're currently working, so the IMSA process is just running. That is robust, repeatable and sustainable. The data is making it, so that's the culture shift into the collect. The curate side of the bio, and we're working on something similar in the marine space, is now operational and starting to work our way through. So that's our data. And digital that we spoke about is coming online in WA through the Environment Online and the Commonwealth Official Environmental Assessment Program, or DEEP programs. They're due to fire up in about a month, which will be fantastic. Really, as we said, the next gap is the decision support and the shared analytics, such that we can start to operationalise how those analytics are put out, which will help us de-risk a transition towards understanding cumulative. We're working on now a feasibility study. We've been very fortunate. We've been given funding and a mandate by our Minister for Science and State Development and our Environment Minister to pull together a feasibility study and a 5-year implementation plan for 2 regions in Western Australia. One is Coburn Sound, which is near Perth and is marine based, and the second one is the Pilbara. They're very different, but we're working our way through the principles for how you would go about generating the feasibility and the implementation planning for operational shared environmental analytics in those 2 areas. And we're trying to do it quickly. We've had a lot of success in Western Australia. That's not us individually, that's the Team WA aspect, because we've had a really positive culture for a number of years now, where proponents are acknowledging that the best way to deal with cumulative is through a data commons, and the best way to get that is to start sharing and working our way through. It's not without risk and it's not without issues, both technical, environmental and legal. But it is working and it is demonstrable and it is moving forward. The next challenge we've got there is how do we start to really think about the understanding cumulative involves forecasting, and ultimately, if we get it right, into scenario planning, both for proponents and for regulator or community to start to understand what's going on. So the feasibility that we're pulling together is designed to show a pathway forward on that for those 2 key regions. It will cover off the organisational elements, governance, leadership management structure, things like that. It will cover off the environmental things and factors, the drivers and pressures, etc., the data that needs to be collected, and the work that needs to go into understanding the impact and the response of what would occur within those 2 regions of Coburn and Pilbara. And then the last part to that is the technology base, which is, if you're going to do shared analytics, easy to say, hard to pull off. What does that look like in terms of data architecture, compute architecture, security architectures? That's just the boring bits, and we'll get into the good stuff of modelling, different modelling tools, different GIS tools and integrations, etc. And the associated science, which is not to be underestimated. We're certainly not underestimating that. It just wasn't a focus for today. And then how do we get that information back out such that it can be interpreted and put to work? Ultimately, that's of course a measure of success. Why is it important? Again, back to where we started, which is the transition from the efficiency around EIA to making it incredibly effective for both economic terms and environmental outcomes, and really managing, de-risking this transition towards cumulative and understanding what that looks like. And again, the three key benefits down the left, which is the EIA, the ESG/TNFD, and then the reporting and the reporting on country. If we can get that working in a shared commons, such that that data is flowing and those elements can be shared across impact assessment, assurance and monitoring and accounting, we think we'll have a really robust system which will help all those different parties. Last slide, back to where we started. Our three disruptions. I'm hoping that I've given you a bit of a fly through of some of the activities that's happening again in WA at the moment. Again, really important for us to restate that this is not all WABSI work. There's a large number of folks across industry, NGOs, state government agencies, Commonwealth agencies that are all working on those various programs. I'm hoping that we've given you a feel for where we've gone in terms of data and how we've pulled together a shared framework to help us guide our investments in those capabilities required. I'm hoping that we've at least highlighted, although I can't show you, come back on the 16th of August, the transition to digital, getting away from email, PDF, etc., and into workflow, case management, etc., which is coming. And really where our next key challenge is to accelerate is into the decision support with the fundamental driver of, as we said, trying to de-risk this transition towards the cumulative. The three objectives that we've got is getting away from bespoke or individual assessment and starting to pull together a robust, repeatable and sustainable value chain for the data, which will enable the above. And in summary, and those three drivers is really around efficiency for proponents, confidence for the regulators, and transparency and clarity for community. And we're doing it as per that diagram at the bottom, moving from the individual assessments towards the shared repositories, which is NIPSA, and moving to a bio. We've got our environment online, which is some of our digital tools, and we're working hard now on building the feasibility case for shared analytics as opposed to just the data collection and the data curation. It's exciting times, and again, thank you to Lorelei and Bridget and Josh for the opportunity to present today, and thank you for your patience, and I hope I wasn't coughing at you too much. Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Back to you.
Thank you, Chris. Fantastic presentation. Let me just hopefully share the correct screen. Okay, so hopefully my screen is now sharing back with everyone. So now we come into the period where okay. Can you see my screen, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. Okay, very good. Okay, so now we come back into the period where we can ask Chris a bunch of questions. I've got some that have come through already, but please do feel free to fire them across. There's just over 300 people online, so I'm sure there's a number of questions that could well come forward in relation to that. Just to start off with one, so what I'm kind of seeing here and interpreting from the approach you're discussing with SEAF is that to an extent we're potentially moving towards an idea of impact assessment of a geography potentially replacing or forming a key component in the future rather than impact assessment of specific projects. So do you think that perhaps kind of over time, how far do you feel that digital impact assessment approaches might mean that we end up doing more geography-based impact assessment where we have a Western Australia or a Pilbara type kind of system versus, you know, these single assessments? Or do you think it'll actually be a mix of the two, if that's a question?
It's a fair question, and I'll preface this one with a personal view rather than anyone else's official hat. We're going in that direction. That's my belief as a country and as a state. So you know, we're not there, but there's clear evidence for it. So, for example, the cumulative impact reforms made their way into our Environmental Protection Act in the last 18 months, which is a clear evidence. You know, it's a clear evidence for a shift towards taking further into account the need to understand the cumulative. In Australia, there was a review of the Commonwealth Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 18 months ago. It happens every 10 years. And the review of that was Professor Graham Samuels, and some of his key recommendations were about moving from process-based assessment to standards-based assessment, or cumulative, if you will start to go down that direction. So there's significant evidence in Australia that that's where the trend is moving. It's not easy, especially you know, when you're really starting to think of taking things from the impact of an individual project, needing to consider what's occurring around it and its peers. And you can personalise this in an organisational construct somewhere in the Pilbara. If you're a BHP, for example, how much do you need to take into consideration the Rio Tintos and the FMGs as their neighbours in mining companies, if you will? How much are you meant to know? How much are you allowed to know? What is commercial in conflicts, etc., commercial incompetence, etc. More to the point, though, Josh, the great one from our perspective is if you put the regulator hat on and you say, well, if you don't do shared data and shared analytics, how is the regulator, who is the only party that will technically see all these proposals coming across their desk, where they're setting in real-time conditions on these projects going forward, how do they have the best chance of setting the appropriate conditions on all these things? So we're in the midst of it is a disruption. There are a lot of questions and challenges to work through. I'm not for a second suggesting it's simple, it's complex. But from our point of view, where we're really saying is if you have shared data and shared analytics, at least you've got a commons and evidence base, which can help to inform the policy setting or the assessment process or the community engagement for how that works. So we think it's baseline work as that transition starts to accelerate.
Mm-hmm. So to follow up on that, there's a number of questions that have come in that I think kind of link into that. I'm just trying to work out whether I asked you them all in a bunch. I think what I'll do is I'll ask the first follow on, and then we'll get a bit more into. There's a number of questions about other data sources that might come into this and whether they're in there. And I obviously appreciate you guys are biodiversity focused, but I guess the first follow-on question in relation to that cumulative side of things, then obviously we're looking to build these kind of systems to protect against cumulative effects, and obviously you showed us the Pilbara, where there's some projects at the moment and there's going to be an expansion out. And clearly the system will come online, but it might come online when some of that expansion out has already happened. So nothing can be perfect. It can only come to market once it's available. But how well will a system like this be able to pick up, I guess, where cumulative effects are already occurring, versus just looking more to the future of will we make it any worse?
So there's a couple of elements to what you're talking about. Philosophically, we speak often amongst our team of perfect being the enemy of good. Do good, just start. So part of our challenge here is this is going to be a 5 to 10 to 15 year window. There's 100 years of development that's already occurred, some of which we have data for, some of which we don't. There's a whole bunch of new things that are in the pipeline and it changes daily. So the concept of having an operationalized shared analytic framework, which is what we're talking about, will give you the best chance of starting to work through that process. But there's two other elements just to touch on, which I didn't really highlight today in detail, but which we are actively thinking about. Understanding the drivers and the pressures of what's occurring in that region, and then the current state baseline, and then the impact and the response on those different environmental themes. Now, the theme might be dewatering. So, changing groundwater flows, which may change a flora ecosystem, which may have a knock-on to a fauna, the bilby, working its way through. How do you forecast how do you actually attempt to do the modelling that says you've got the base science that understands those things? What are the relationships between groundwater, the flora ecosystem, and then the fauna to be impacted? How do you then start to model and forecast what's occurring there? So there's a whole series of challenges out of that. And of course, that's generic forecasting. If you then actually say, well, then I'm an individual proponent, you need to be able to allow for scenario planning, which can work its way into that. So I'm going to, I don't know, put a new infrastructure asset in that area, which is going to have an impact on what's occurring. How do you allow for that? And if you're then the regulator, what happens if there's 10 of those that all come across your desk on the same day? So the cumulative is probably the wickedest challenge that certainly I've ever tried to get my head around. And it's going to take time. The approach that we're taking to it is to pick regional boundaries, to be very customer driven, very outcome driven. So if people are interested in specific needs, either a proponent or a regulator or a community group, narrow down, because if you go too broad too fast, the problem becomes overwhelming, which is why we've started to put in place these foundation elements, if you will, around culture shift for data collection and then the curation, and then we'll work our way up. But it's going to raise as many questions as it solves. I think there are another element to this, which is why else would you do it, will be the evidence base for ESG and TNFD, environmental accounts, biodiversity accounts, things like that. So you can actually start to get people's interest not just in creating this data asset, not just for EIA, but for biodiversity accounting, net nature positive, etc., and ESG. So there's multiple drivers for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's really good, and I hope that answers a little bit of Maurice's question on kind of how does digital EIA improve cumulative impact analysis. I think that certainly got onto that. So I'm going to move on to another question area that links to a number of people who've fired in questions. So I'm going to base it around Tim Mitchell's question, but then bring in a few other elements from others as well. So Tim's is, do you foresee the potential for the platform to be extended beyond biodiversity, so it can cover things like regional air quality, cumulative noise effects, maybe impacts on cultural or indigenous kind of people's kind of heritage? And then equally, there were a number of questions about kind of what's the opportunity for kind of, I guess, reconnaissance surveys or monitoring surveys to go into this, because I think certainly some people and myself were perceiving that this was more ESIA baseline surveys that were feeding into the process rather than necessarily monitoring data or other wider assessments that are done earlier, perhaps outside of the EIA process.
Yeah, so yes to both questions, and we're designing it very much around that. So I've given you some biodiversity examples today. Again, we actually suspect in the Pilbara, the first set of challenges is quite possibly going to be groundwater and surface water, but it's the same principles. It's the same culture, collect, curate, integrate, analyze, use type logic, and you're just in a different domain. Different capabilities, different specializations, but the same framework and the same logic. So that is very actively, that conversation is underway. It's not intended to be restricted to just terrestrial flora fauna, working its way out. And happy to, I'll stop on there. But there's again, we've got good programs and some evidence behind that one. In terms of the second part, the monitoring is absolutely fundamental, because the baseline stuff is what was, not what is. So again, the systems and the technology platform that is being designed by Microsoft and others is designed to take the monitoring data and feed it in as real a time as we can do it, whatever your version of real time is, into those systems, such that we have the ability to hindcast through the history, the data that we've got through the baseline surveys or the monitoring data as it ages. The concept then being that we'd have the best possible day-to-day, the baseline as of today, and it'll change tomorrow and the day after that, to the best that we can, and appreciating there's a whole different set of technologies and questions and techniques to those different data collections. And then in Coburn in particular at the moment, we're doing a lot of work around forecasting. So one is hindcasting, the second part is attempting to predict, which is of course what the cumulative is. If you're going to put conditions on a project going forward, you're attempting to predict understand what you think the cumulative will be, and then predict what the additional impact of another project will be on that current region or ecosystem. And I shied away from that one today, but there's a whole bunch of clever sciencey folks working on that space.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. That's really, really interesting. Thank you. Let's have a look. There's quite a number of questions that take us into kind of how can we learn from this internationally. I do want to get onto those. I'm just quickly looking across to other questions that are more pertinent to the specifics of what we've discussed. So the two of those before we then move on. We've got about 15 minutes left. So one of them was in terms of kind of this cumulative and moving into the shared environmental analytical facility. How would you go about kind of determining bioregional boundaries for the kind of cumulative effects? Because that can obviously be quite important in understanding that, or is that something that is within the next step of the project?
So we've proposed a set of principles for how you pick regions, and I'm shooting from the hip, so I might get them slightly wrong. We have actually formalised this, but the first one was it needed to be, and this is just balancing this out, it needed to be environmentally valuable and environmentally sensitive. It needed to be economically valuable and economically diverse. It needed to have a diverse range of community or traditional owner interest in those particular regions. And then the alchemy is it needs to be contested. There need to be a differing set of views as to what a version of good looks like. Verging from an ecosystem perspective through to an economic bias, whatever that is, and where you sit on that bell curve. So we've come at it from a principles perspective, and while we've just proposed those internally, they're certainly there to be improved on. And again, I can't see a reason why anything we're doing there would be unique or special that couldn't be taken or improved or perhaps applied elsewhere. The sub-region part around the environmental side of things will absolutely need the right science folk to put those boundaries in place. So that is acknowledged that needs the best science or environmental science to pick what those regional boundaries are once you've sorted through those principles at the start.
Fantastic. Let's have a look. So I guess, in relation to this in Western Australia, then obviously all this work's going on. I guess to an extent, it therefore assumes that the process as it works at the moment isn't capable of delivering the protections the environment might need. So Justin asked the question of, do you foresee the imposition of more stringent operational conditions on new developments as a result of this tool coming forwards? Or is it more likely to kind of stop consents? I guess where do you see it biting for the environment if all this effort is being put in to develop it?
So I'll give you two elements to two answers to the question, because it's a very challenging question and it's certainly contentious to answer. The way that we're describing the shared facility, the same logic is effectively we're trying to do what the Weather Bureau does. So the Weather Bureau takes data points from public. They take the weather points, they model it, and they release a forecast. And the modelling for different regions is more accurate, and the modelling over different timeframes, near time is usually more accurate than longer time frame. But what they do then is they release a forecast. For example, West Australia is going to be a Category 3 cyclone hitting Port Hedland, and it's going to strike between 7 and 8 days. We think it's going to be between this spot and this spot. What they don't do though is tell you what to do about that. Right? So what we're trying to say, and if you want to pitch your tent and get excited about it, that's awesome. If you're a big ship owner and you want to send them out to sea to ride it out rather than being in shallow water, do that too. So part of the logic that we're trying to put forward is what we are and what we're not. What we're not is a consultant, we're not a proponent, and we're not the regulator, nor are we in regional planning or regional assessment. This is very much about digital transformation and shared environmental data and analytics. What we are, though, is trying to take all those data assets, operationalize that as efficiently, as effectively as we can, such that a consultant or a proponent or a regulator or a community member can pick up that forecast and start to interpret it how they choose to. Do I think it will lead to changes in terms of how projects are assessed? Almost inevitably, but I don't think it will be negative or positive. I think I can't judge that. That's not within my skill set or experience to do. What I'm hoping it will be personally is more accurate, so that there'll be less reliance on precautionary principle or less the opposite, just let it rip kind of thing. So then again, it's a personal view, not that space. So what we are, what we're not, what we're trying to be is the operator of that system, working with industry and others to make that system hum, such the forecasting model. But we've got customers, and that's not for us to have that view.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say you're not a consultancy and you've got customers. From a number of the questions that have come in, I think you could be an international consultancy, and you would have lots of potential customers. There's much interest, I think, in terms of from questions of kind of how could we take this kind of facility and apply it in another country to kind of some kind of questions within that of kind of developers being willing to submit data to the government but not willing to kind of share it more widely, so indicating it's confidential. So that might be quite a I suppose let's start with that. That's quite a bespoke a focus question that allows us to shift into this: how do we learn from what you guys are doing for potential wider application? So I guess one of the first challenges is in a number of jurisdictions you get data being submitted or information being submitted, but then it's kind of like, oh, but only you can see it, we're not going to share it more widely. So how's Western Australia kind of overcome that challenge of making that data kind of 100% available?
Well, we have 100% successfully, but we're well on the path to it. But it's not universal, right? So not everybody, everyone has to give their data to the government. Not everyone chooses to share. The vast majority do, and that's mostly about again, it's a cultural challenge rather than anything else. Where if you reach a maturity or a tipping point, again, it's personal view, where you think, okay, we need to work our way through this cumulative challenge. That is the overriding decadal-long theory of limits, that we've got. And if that starts to make its way into legislation, which it has, then you're back into well, how do I do that? How do I not? If I'm a proponent, really, what I want to be doing is three things: as quickly as I can, with as less expense as possible, but with the best possible environmental outcome. Now, those three things are not always aligned, in terms of outcome. So one of the ways we've spent a lot of time and energy and a lot over 5 years building the best relationships we can with key proponents, with key consultant groups, with key regulators, and trying to make a case that says if we play team and we back to a data commons and we work our way through it, then there's real benefit here. We have precedent and pattern in, and a lot of countries have this is not an Australian thing, in the geosciences. So one of the things we've done is taken the same history. My background is in exploration geophysics, so I'm a geoscience person if you go back far enough. But in WA, and this is true of Australia, it's true of South Africa, it's true of Canada, it's true of the States, it's true of Brazil. It's probably true of a bunch of other places, but I can't hand on heart say that, where if you want to go exploring for minerals, the government grants you the right or a license to go and to do your exploration. As part of that, you bid to say, I will collect X amount of data, I will do this amount of drilling, or this amount of geophysics, or this amount of soil sampling, or whatever it is. And certainly in Australia and some of those other jurisdictions I mentioned, once a year you're compelled by law to give that data. That's in law. You have to give that data across to the government. Now, again, this is where personal view, not bush lawyer view, where you bump into copyright and licensing. So, you can copyright form, but you can't copyright fact. So the fact that a tree is green, it is green. It's a pine tree, you can't copyright that. But if you put it into a form a format of a report or a format of a data set or a format of something else. So one of the ways that we've been working through this in WA is when those data sets for mineralisation, for example, are given across to our geological survey, they give it across their data. So mining company X's, exploration company X's data goes into a government format. And as part of that exercise, right, that's one of the cultural. So there's a whole bunch of things in here that are cultural as well as legal. What it really comes down to, I think, is it's an argument that says we're stronger together and we're going to make this cultural shift work. And it has to come out of respect for all parties. It has to come out of respect for people who will find some of this challenging. And it needs to be done in a way such that you strike a balance. And again, I have a personal view, but it's not my role to have this view, between sort of ecosystem and economy of how this is going to push forward. I guess our key point to all these parties is if you play the counterfactual and say, if you don't do this, how else are you going to go about it? So by sticking to the shared data and the analytics and trying to be white hat in the forecasting and the reporting and the decision support, we think that's our best way of fostering that cultural shift in a way that makes economic sense for the CEOs, keeps the lawyers happy enough, and gives the environmental folks a benefit in terms of efficiency or effective decision making.
Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. I'm looking at the time and realizing what time we've got left. So because your example, I think the IFC's example on artificial intelligence that I'm hoping to get a webinar from them in early October, and I know you guys are beginning to potentially bring in a similar kind of tool doing natural language processing and automatically reading PDFs. And I guess there's a lot of interest in kind of saying, how can we take this and apply it in another country? How can we make this potentially expand not from Western Australia, but to actually be a global approach and those kind of things? And clearly we're not going to be able to answer every one of those questions in the few minutes we've got left. And it may be that at some point in the future we have a panel debate about this, either online or possibly at a future IAIA conference. But I guess it does open up to a wider question, which is, do you feel that there's enough sharing of and learning from our different projects? So you see with these very big, certainly in the UK at least, I'm seeing it with these very big infrastructure projects. We've got a Crossrail project, a new railway underneath London, the Olympics, various others, where they're having these learning legacies so that there's information and knowledge shared as the process goes along. And obviously that in itself takes time and effort to do, but it is trying to present that. Do you feel there's enough of that going on across the digital impact assessment space? And if not, or even if so, what could be done to enable more of these conversations, to enable a bunch of our questioners to follow up with you or others to learn more and not make the same mistakes, make more efficiencies, perhaps do a simpler version of this if they haven't got the same scale of budget or buy-in?
So I think the fact we're having this conversation and you've facilitated this as a conversation is just a wonderful outcome. So I think the intent is there, and so if I try and tackle it quickly at your time, can we do it? Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, and I will make the very open offer from our work and our IP in the WABSI space. I can't speak for all our partners, but certainly in our space, we're going to make all our work public domain. So it's open. And in the same time, our request is please make it better. We're not saying good news, we've cracked it. We're saying here's an offering. Let's do, to your point, exactly that. There's a way there, because the properties and the capabilities, that's why that shared framework logic was built. Again, it's not perfect, but is it good enough to start that process? That's what it's proven, it's good enough. So I really do think there's an opportunity to kick on and talk through those things. I think the process and the methods, the logic and the capabilities are shared. There's individual environmental factors within regions or legislative or legal requirements within countries that need to be considered, but we're not actually that different. The base principles are pretty much the same. So I would willingly take up the challenge of sharing as much of our work as we can if it's of interest. We're not pushing it, but if it's of interest, happy to share it, and we will very willingly, I hope, demonstrate good behaviours in terms of taking on feedback from others. And our work from GBIF is an example where we picked up a concept that they developed and we've tried to extend it and then put it back out. So, you know, those things, I personally, I really do think there's a chance that you could design once, build many for the majority of the stuff. And I think if we could find the right parties, then you could go a heck of a long way with open source type systems and code and platforms to helping people accelerate down this path.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's a nice place to perhaps bring it to an end and bring IAIA HQ back in to close us off. So many thanks, Chris, for myself for your presentation, your generosity of time, and working through your illness and late into the middle evening in your end. I think to an extent there's also a question, as I think Bridget is going to come back on and join us. I think there is a question to IAIA, and perhaps it's a forthcoming future executive director. As I believe a search is going to be going on in relation to that, to say, you know, what role can IAIA take in facilitating that conversation? You know, I'm helping it with the webinar series, and IAIA is in that. Chris is, you know, happy to contribute. I believe you've had some engagement with the Dreams project in Denmark that we're hoping to bring in at some point. Certainly, I know from some discussions in bringing the report together, there's some really interesting and similar work going on in Canada, where they're looking for a facility for a nuclear waste repository, and they're looking at, you know, how do you bring in and share transparency and access in terms of data provision with, you know, kind of consultancy-led, professionally data gathered information and traditional indigenous knowledge, you know, which in many ways, you know, won't necessarily be on digital maps and those kind of things, but can be more important than some of the other things. So I think there's a lot to learn from us, as well as the questions going on. Anyway, a very big thank you from me. Bridget, are you coming back in to close us out?
I am. Hello. Thank you very much, Josh, for facilitating and organizing the webinar. Thank you, Chris, for an extraordinary presentation. We really appreciate your time. I echo all of Josh's sentiments there. And Josh, question noted in terms of II's future and our role and how we can facilitate the discussion and the dialogue and moving things forward in the field of digital impact assessment. So I have taken a note for that for II's future. So I just want to thank all of you participants who are on today for your time and that you spent with us, and just wanted to let you know that, as I mentioned before, in a day or two you will be receiving a link to the recording as well as the slides that were presented to you today. I know there was a lot of data on there, so I'm sure you're excited to look over it in more detail. You'll also receive a brief survey when you leave and close out this webinar, and so we do encourage you to just take a quick minute to fill that out. It does help us to provide more content for you in terms of what you're interested in doing. So I encourage you to not bypass that, but fill that out for us. We'd appreciate that a lot. So if you did hear something that was great and you want to continue the discussion today, feel free to shout it out or share it on Twitter or any other social media options there for you. Our Twitter handle is there, as well as the hashtag II webinar. So keep the discussion going. II members, you can also discuss on IAIA Connect as well. So we know that your time is valuable, and we hope that you found this webinar valuable as well. See you all next time.